Without further ado, guys, I'm going to bring on our first guest. Full disclosure, the following guest is a friend of mine, somebody that I really admire. As I say, when I was in Lebanon, she was probably the one journalist that everyone would speak about and would know and would look up to. She is a political economist, a war reporter, and an editor-in-chief of MENA Uncensored, which I recommend is thriving on Twitter at the moment, or that she can tell us, unless she's been censored like myself. But so welcome to the show, my dear friend, Leila Hatoum. Leila, how are you getting on?
It's a pleasure, and I'm really happy to see you tonight. And I have to say, I mean, George Galloway, you haven't looked any better. Like, you look so fit now. Don't hate me for that.
Oh no, I'm never going to get on again now after that.
Like, it's always a pleasure. Both of you are dear friends of mine, and I look forward to welcoming you back again in Lebanon. And unfortunately, MENA Uncensored got suspended on YouTube. They deleted all of our videos. Of course, they don't want anybody to chart in Israel's crimes against humanity that they were committing in Lebanon and in Palestine throughout the past period. So yeah, we are just uncensored at the moment.
Uncensored being censored. Yeah, I've experienced it myself. Leila, I really want to just begin by asking you, I suppose, because when we hear about Palestine in the West, it's because of the scale of depravity that's going on in Gaza. But something I've noticed, and obviously I'm very attuned to it now, having been in Lebanon and having had the experiences I have had, we don't hear much about Lebanon in the Western media at all. Just little murmurings because you were under literal Israeli bombardment again this week. So for people who mightn't be familiar with what's going on in Lebanon, could you just take us through what the last week was like under direct attack again from the Israeli Western-backed regime?
Oh, most certainly. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know if everyone knows that, but Lebanon and the Israeli occupation managed to reach a ceasefire arrangement back on November 27th, 2024. It went into effect back then. 7 months later, the Israelis continue to breach that ceasefire arrangement on a daily basis, be it bombardment, assassinations, and basically flyovers, breaching our air sovereignty, territorial sovereignty as well. They continue to occupy Lebanese territories, and they are upscaling. Every week, they commit more and more crimes that breach the ceasefire and more crimes against humanity and against international law as well. So last week, they targeted my hometown, Burj Brajni, which is basically a part of Beirut's southern suburbs. And it was the largest scale attack since the ceasefire arrangement went into effect about 6 to 7 months ago. They destroyed dozens of homes. All of them are civilian facilities. For those who don't believe me, at least the Lebanese army went over and inspected 2 of the targeted areas before the Israelis hit them, because they send you what you call a warning 10 minutes before they hit. With 10 minutes, how many people you are able to evacuate an area that has hundreds of thousands of people living in it. My 86-year-old aunt and most of my cousins from my dad's side of the family were celebrating my cousin's wedding. And they were in that area. They got stuck in traffic with hundreds of thousands of people trying to evacuate at the same time. And I was sitting there over the phone, listening to my aunt crying over the phone. When I tried to reach the area, they basically, the security over there pushed me out, saying that it's too dangerous to reach there to evacuate. So people inside will have to go outside at one point in time. Luckily, we didn't have injuries when it comes to people impacted by the bombardment, but we have over 130 families who lost their homes. They're now basically displaced. And we have people who lost their means of living because they lost their shops. And the Lebanese army went there and they inspected, as I said, 2 of the supposedly areas that were going to be targeted. And they told the Israelis, they told the United Nations, they told the Military Technical Committee for Lebanon, that is chaired by the Americans and has basically the British and the French members of it, that there's nothing in those facilities. These are civilian facilities, and they took footage, and the Israelis said, like, no, we don't care. We're going to bombard it again.
It's just incredible to me to, again, to touch on something I was talking about earlier, the fact that the Israeli fighter jets flew over the stadium on the occasion of Hassan Nasrallah's funeral. And it was just trying to create in my mind some sort of comparison for if something like that happened in the West. that a Western country's sovereign airspace would be violated in that way. But can you explain both to me and to everyone listening how this is coming about in a period where it feels like the government in Lebanon, a little bit like Syria, is posturing in a more friendly way towards Israel, and yet, so for instance, we've seen the Lebanese government and Abbas talking about decommissioning weapons in the Palestinian camps in Lebanon as some sort of gesture that you would feel has something to do with appeasing Israel. So is it a case of when you battle Israel and you resist, you get bombed, and when you try and make peace with them, you also get bombed?
Well, the thing is, this is what people don't get. Ever since the Israelis were invested, or basically they were pushed into our region, we're not talking about the early 1900s. We're talking about as early as 1830s. They started creating problems for the communities around them. So they get attacked. And once they get attacked, they have the communities that send them in Europe go and support them and basically give them more weapons and basically keep them over there. So they have to bombard people around them. They have to attack people around them so they can continue to stay in a hostile environment, so that the Europeans and the Western community that send them over here will continue to send them funding and weapons. But let's put that aside, and I'll take you back to what our government is doing and the flyovers, because you were there at the funeral. I was there at the funeral. And as a Lebanese, it basically made my blood boil, not because I support the resistance against the Israeli occupation. It's a natural thing for a patriotic person to stand against the occupation. And anybody who's resisting that occupation, I will stand with them. I don't give a damn if the world basically calls them terrorists. Under international law, if 1 centimeter of your land is under occupation, you have the right to hold arms and fight that occupation anywhere, by any means possible, including armed struggle. And that basically gives a legal umbrella for Hezbollah, for Hamas, and other groups that the West is trying to insinuate that they are terrorists. They're not. It gives them an umbrella that they are legitimate under international law. So during that funeral, we were standing there where you had hundreds of thousands of mourners inside and outside the sports city crying over their martyred leaders, because the Israelis assassinated 2 leaders of Hezbollah, not 1. And the Israelis sent the squadron that assassinated both men to fly over at the lowest altitude. And there was silence for about 3 to 5 seconds, because people were thinking, like, did any friendly country send their squadron to pay respect? And then they noticed that these were Israeli players. Suddenly everybody was like angry about it, and they were saying death to Israel, right? And the West only captures that moment to show that people are hostile to Israel and they're calling for death to Israel. They don't show the reason. Same thing as when they call the resistance terrorist, but they don't show the reason why there is a resistance. It's because we have an occupation. When it comes to our government, thinking that they would want to disarm the resistance at any point, and it's an easy task, I'll tell you one thing. We had resistance before Hezbollah was there. Hezbollah came about in 1985 officially. 1982, they started forming themselves, right after the Israeli second invasion of Lebanon. But we did have lots of resistance movements back in 1978 when the Israelis invaded Lebanon also. Back in 1967 when the Israelis bombarded Lebanon during their war with other Arab countries that Lebanon had no hand in. And they actually attacked Lebanon several times between 1949 and 1967. Why am I mentioning 1949? It's because Lebanon signed an armistice agreement. It was one of the first Arab countries to sign an armistice agreement with the Israelis. And the Israelis breached it dozens of times after that. And Lebanon kept maintaining self-composure over this one. We didn't have resistance at that time. We didn't have arms to fight them. And they continued to attack us and they continued to bombard us. So without arms and without resistance, they bombarded us. And with an armistice agreement, they still bombarded us. And after the invasion, we had the resistance to stand in their face, and they still bombarded us. So whatever we do, they will continue to bombard us, because that's what an occupation does. It tries to kill you to take over your land. And when it doesn't, or when it's not able to do so, it labels you as basically as a terrorist. It dehumanizes you because they control international media, unfortunately. And luckily, we have basically George Galloway and few honest ones out there who literally see things as they are. And when our government comes out to say that, that makes me feel so bad, because at the end of the day, if your own countrymen, the politicians, listen to external dictations to implement something that the external countries, including the Americans, want to impose on us in favor of our occupier, which is the Israeli occupation, I mean, what's left? We are screwed both ways by our government and by the occupation itself and the international community, which washed its hands of what's happening over here. And they're just watching us and they're just preparing about their next investment in the region. The Syrians, I mean, you said a little leaning towards the Israelis. They're completely leaning towards the Israelis. They haven't shot a single bullet against the Israelis. The Israelis took over all of South Syria and they've done nothing. In fact, their new self-appointed president, he wasn't elected. He's a self-appointed terrorist who belonged to Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and we call him Julani, Gewlani. It's because we believe that he's an Israeli basically embedded within these groups in order for him to reach power and then give the Israelis what they want. He just said, we want peace with the Israelis. He literally came out and said that. So it's not a little, it's a lot. And when it comes to people of Gaza and the Palestinian president, the PA president who's been PA president for the past 3 decades nearly, that person came over to Lebanon to talk about disarming the Palestinian factions inside Lebanese territories. Basically, the Palestinians are found in refugee camps, right? But at the end of the day, do you know how many terrorist groups are embedded in the refugee camps themselves? If you disarm, let's say, for example, Fatah, or the larger groups within that follow the PA, the Palestinian Authority, inside those camps, that means the smaller terrorist groups that were embedded over the years, including by the Americans and the Israelis, will take over power because they will not disarm. So what does that mean? Mahmoud Abbas Abu Mazen, the PA president, who might be able to impose his will on Fatah because he is also the leader of Fatah and disarm them, he is actually putting them forward towards being slaughtered by those smaller terrorist groups who have infested and embedded themselves inside these refugee camps.
Thank you, Leila. What a comprehensive answer. I wanted to touch on your take on the Hezbollah furore in this part of the world at the moment. Whilst the Israelis were continuing their genocidal campaign, most of us were talking about the banned kneecap for probably about 10 days at the very fact that Mokara, one of the members of kneecap, had waved a Hezbollah flag that was handed to him during a performance. He wasn't walking down the street with a Hezbollah flag or anything like that. And he had held it up. And now he's under criminal charges right now from the British state, which is just so laughable to anybody from Ireland who knows the history of British injustices against civilians in Ireland. But I suppose we didn't hear any perspective from Hezbollah during the furore. It was just, he has done this thing, and I think we can all accept in the West that that's wrong because they're a terrorist group and they're evil. I know we had conversations when I was over there that you had been critical of Hezbollah. It's not like you were endorsing everything Hezbollah has ever done, but you had such a wonderful way of describing the nature of Hezbollah that, here it's seen as this kind of terrorist grouping in a cave, plotting evil ways to destroy the West, whereas actually Hezbollah is a state within a state. Could you speak on that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let me just stand in solidarity with anybody who stood or stands or continues to stand with the Palestinian cause, because it's a humane cause, it's a humanitarian cause at the end of the day. When you are against an occupier that commits genocide and Holocaust against a whole population, that's dehumanizing a whole population, that is basically putting them under enforced famine, it's man-made famine, and you stand with the resistance against such a genocide, and then you get basically pushed by your own government that follows draconian laws to put you in jail for that. I don't know, not only feel sorry for people, not only at NICAP, but also other activists who had been detained by the British anti-terrorism police or interrogated by the British anti-terrorism police. In fact, we had 2 reporters, roving reporters, Sarah Wilkinson, who's an activist, and Shamil Suleiman as well. They were interrogated with brutally by the British anti-terrorism police. We do understand the situation, and I stand with them fully, not only as a reporter, but also as a human being who understands why they did what they did. Waving a flag shouldn't be something that's criminalized. It shouldn't be something that labels somebody as a terrorist. Standing with the resistance shouldn't be something that labels somebody as a terrorist. Otherwise, I do call upon the British to be all called, like the whole political milieu, to be called terrorists for standing with the resistance against the Nazis who occupied at one point in time several parts of Europe. Charles de Gaulle is a terrorist because he fought against the Nazis who occupied Paris. And at the end of the day, the Americans who sought freedom for their own territories, they should be called terrorists for fighting over the occupation. If you look at the whole situation, every single nation that's now labeling any resistance group standing in the face of an actual occupation that the United Nations call an occupation, those countries should be ashamed of themselves. They are the real terrorists. Waving a flag doesn't hurt anyone, but putting a whole nation, 2.3 million people in Gaza under siege and enforced famine, that's terrorism. This is what the British should be basically standing against, not somebody holding a flag for a group that actually is standing against the occupation. Having said that, for those who don't know the background, I don't belong to any political party, but I do stand with what's right. And I do criticize when certain groups make mistakes, and that includes the resistance. It's not only limited to Hezbollah or Hamas or anybody else, but across the region, whenever they have something that I don't agree with, I come out and say it, and I'm very vocal about that. But when it comes to Hezbollah fighting the Israeli occupation, they are a resistance. Their flag represents a political party that's officially recognized in Lebanon. They are officially part of the parliament, and they are officially part of the Lebanese government. So the British government that considers Hezbollah a terrorist organization should criminalize the whole cabinet at any point, because we have 5 Hezbollah members in that cabinet. But at the end of the day, political games play a role. They have picked the prime minister at any point. They are supporting the president. So in that sense, they have to support the cabinet. It's a catch-22 system for the British. They cannot come out and say we are against this cabinet. At the same time, they cannot come out and say basically we are pro this cabinet. So they are put in a pickle over here because of their own actions. I don't know how to put it in a different way, but Hezbollah is not some sort of an alien group that you brought from Mars and implanted it in Lebanon. These are people of Lebanon. Seriously, I mean, when they speak about Hezbollah, it's like as if a group, you can take it out and then you can eliminate it and that's it, it's done. Or when they hand over their arms, people will stop resisting in Lebanon. Resistance doesn't stop, it's an idea. If a single person has his own, let's say, olive grove or basically fig trees occupied by the Israeli occupation at any point, that person has the right to hold arms, and he will or she will hold arms against the Israelis. The government has no say on that. Not even the resistance groups have a say on that. Hezbollah were a group of people who grouped themselves when they saw other resistance groups failing in standing up to the Israeli occupation. They trained, they accepted help from anybody and everybody who sent them aid during the period that extended from the 80s to the 90s until today. And they managed to beat the Israelis several times in their own game, despite the fact that they had lesser weapons. These are the farmers, the butchers, the bakers, the person the mechanics who actually fix your cars. Those were the people of South Lebanon who, under the Israeli occupation for nearly 2 decades, were being raped, killed, kicked out of their homes, and tortured in concentration camps. For those who don't understand the situation, I do advise you to go to Professor David Miller's basically X account, or just go YouTube it, basically The Butcher of Khiyam. There's a whole documentary for the survivors of that concentration camp, telling the world what happened to them under the Israeli occupation and those who collaborated with the Israeli occupation to torture the Lebanese in South Lebanon. So do you think people who saw their parents at any point killed by the Israelis or raped by the Israelis, they saw their homes destroyed by the Israelis inside Lebanese territories, and they decided to hold arms and fight back? Do you think that these are aliens? Do you think that they were imported from elsewhere? Yes, there are part of the Lebanese who live in northern Lebanon, or basically away from South Lebanon, who are not in direct contact with the Israelis on a daily basis. They don't feel the same as the southern Lebanese people do. But at the end of the day, you cannot go and criminalize them for wanting to fight for what is rightfully theirs at the end of the day. So this is why you have a split somewhere in Lebanon with those who are pro the Israeli camp and those who are pro the resistance camp as well. That includes the prime minister, unfortunately. Money plays a role as well. And then you do have to look into the whole situation. Every single nation that is invested in the Israeli occupation is putting money into their own groups in Lebanon to be vocal. They control the media. And at one point when you watch the whole series, yes, people are fed up with war. But when you listen to the actual people of South Lebanon, we're talking about nearly 1 million people. When they speak about the hardships they have to live under the Israeli occupation, then you'll start understanding what's happening. But you will never see it in the media because the media is invested in the other camp that supports the Israeli occupation.
So beautifully put, Leila, and I think you've probably broadened a lot of people's minds there on the idea of the terrorist. You know, it's something that as you know, I'm kind of obsessed with, like this idea of dehumanizing people by just labeling them, and that's it. You don't have to think about it anymore. So well put. So before we end, I'd just love you to talk about where people can follow your work first and foremost, but also just give us a sense of what you think going forward is the ultimate purpose. What's Israel's game here, particularly in Lebanon? What would be your fears of what their ultimate game is?
Well, my primary and only fear is that the Israelis will engulf all of Lebanon. For those who have been following on this war just for fun for the past 19 months, 20 months now, we're approaching 2 years. If you haven't noticed the badges on the shoulders of the Israeli occupation soldiers, it shows Greater Israel. And Greater Israel is a fictional place that they had literally redrawn into their religious books. It never existed in the past, and it will never exist in the future so long that there is a resistance. But it includes countries, all of Lebanon, all of Syria until parts of southern Turkey, parts of Iraq, parts of Kuwait, parts of Saudi Arabia, and all of Jordan, and parts of Egypt. If you don't call that a cancerous expansion, I don't know what is. And in that sense, for those who think that because they try to link themselves, the Israelis, they try to link themselves to Jews. Judaism has nothing to do with the whole thing. Judaism is a religion that actually abolished and stood against Zionism back in the 1970s, and they pushed the United Nations to issue what you call a decree under United Nations Secretary General Assembly that says that Zionism is a form of racism, and it's basically a discriminatory movement that is secular and has nothing to do with religion. Those Zionists not only took over the Jewish voice across the world and hijacked it towards their own interest, but they're now falsifying history to insinuate that all these countries belong to Jews at one point in time. But who are the real Jews? At the end of the day, I will just go back to science because this is what everybody believes in, right? There was this John Hopkins study that showed that 98% of today's Israelis in the Israeli entity do not belong to the Levant, which means their roots are not from this region. Most of the roots come from Africa and from Europe mainly. And you have about 88 to 90% of the current day Palestinians, their roots belong to this region, which means these people continue to live in their own territories. They changed their religion because this is what they do. They adopt into a new religion. How do you think Christianity came about? Some of them were Jews, some of them were atheists, Romans, etc., whatever you want to call them, and they adopted into a new religion. And some of them later on adopted into Islam. So at the end of the day, there were not enough, if we want to go with science, there were not enough Jews to fill in all of these territories that they claim as part of Greater Israel. And those people who are claiming that they are the descendants of the people of this region, they have zero DNA that ties them to this region, whereas the Palestinians continue to live in this territory, and they belong to this territory not only 100 years ago or 500 years ago, but thousands of years ago. There are families that extend to the past 2,000 to 3,000 years, and they can trace back their lineage. This is how attached they are to their land. Whereas basically when you look at Benjamin Netanyahu, and they've changed, by the way, those Ashkenazis and those who came from Europe, they changed their last names to insinuate that they are part of this region. Benjamin Netanyahu's last name is Milikowski. Golda Meir's last name is not Golda Meir. David Ben Gurion is actually David Gruen. And this list goes on and on and on. They adopted into our names, like Golan Heights. You have people who actually renamed their last name into Golan to insinuate that they are part of this region, but they're not. Those are purely, let's say, Russian, Polish, whatever you want to call it, Eastern European people who came over here. They fry under our sun. We tan over here, they fry. And they want to convince us that they are part of this land. Unfortunately, the world, even though that they now know the truth, they are still silent about it. And the governments have sold themselves to the devil, and they don't care.
Thank you so much, Leila. Absolute pleasure to talk to you. Let people know where they can follow your work.
Sure. I mean, I have my private account, Leila1H, Leila1H, and I have had that since 2011 on X. And I've been vocal about every single thing that's happening in my region, trying to tell the world the truth about this region, because we're trying to fight propaganda. And this is the only way that we can expand people's mind to understand the current fighting that's happening over here. We launched MENA Uncensored last year. We got attacked several times. We tried to open our website recently, and the Israelis attacked it. And when we had our YouTube channel documenting the Israeli war crimes committed in Lebanon and Palestine, YouTube deleted it the day we posted our coverage of the funeral of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and Sayyid Hashim Safieddin, Hezbollah Secretary Generals. And they deleted it. So we contested it. You get one strike, right? We directly contested it, saying we are covering it just like Reuters and Bloomberg are doing so, and basically CNN. And they said, no, you're supporting a terrorist organization and you have no right to access your videos. It's completely deleted now. I mean, normally they give you 3 strikes. We got only 1 strike for covering the funeral. So that tells you a lot.